Hey everyone, so welcome to lesson 2 of our statistics unit. In this lesson we're going to look at weighted means, trimmed means, and outliers. So the first thing we're going to look at are outliers, and basically an outlier is a piece of data that doesn't fit in with the rest of the data, either because it's too small or it's much lower than the rest of the data or it's too high. So in this example here, both 3 and I would also say the 85 are both outliers in this question. So you can have more than one outlier. If we didn't have the 85 here, the 3 would still be the outlier. So you can have one outlier or multiple outliers, basically things that just don't fit in with the rest of the data. So if we look at an example here, and I noticed a typo as I was making this, but there are 6 people in a group that are 61, 61, 63, 64, 66, and 90 inches tall. The first thing that we want to do is to find the mean, median, and mode, just like we did in the last lesson. And basically what we're going to do is see what is the impact of having those outliers in our data set. So to calculate the mean, our mean we know is equal to the sum of all of our values over n. So what I want to do is add up all of those values. So 61, 61, 63, 64, and 66, and 90. And we're going to divide by our 6 people. Okay, when you do that, that should come out to 405 over 6, which works out to 67.5. So the mean is 67.5. If we're looking to do the median, so the median, remember, is just the middle value in a data set. And in this question, there are actually 2 middle values because we have an even number of values that we're dealing with. So the median is going to equal 63 plus 64 over 2. Okay, and if you don't remember that from the last unit, go back and watch the previous video that I posted, and this works out to 63.5. Okay, and then the mode is the value that occurs the most often, and in this question the mode is 61 because there are 2 of them. Okay, so we can see that those numbers are quite different, right? So 67.5 for the mean, 63.5 for the median, and 61. So what happens to this set of data if we take out that person who is the outlier? So we're going to remove the 90-inch tall person. And let's see what our new mean, median, and mode would be. So the mean for this question, now that we take out that one person, is going to be a little bit less. So I'm going to add up all of those people with the exception of that person who is 90 inches tall. And because I'm removing that person, I now only have 5 people that I'm dealing with. Okay, so that n is going to change for this question. So when you do that, that should work out to 315 over 5, which works out to 63. So the mean is much lower than the previous one. We've gone down a lot from the previous one. The median for this question, now because I have only 5 people, I only have one middle value. So my median is going to just be 63 for this part of the question. And then my mode, I still have 2 people that were 61 inches tall, so my mode doesn't change. Okay, so you can see that by comparing the mean, the median, and the mode, the value that changed the most was the mean. So the median is relatively the same, so 63.5 for this one and 63 for the second time we did it. The mode did not change between both of them. It's just the mean that is usually impacted the most anytime you have outliers in your data. Okay. So what that means is that if you have outliers in your data, we should really calculate a trimmed mean. And what a trimmed mean does is it disregards or it takes out outliers by eliminating values on the high end and eliminating values on the left end or on the low end. So we don't have that big of a difference in our means when we're calculating them. So the whole purpose of trimming your mean is just to get rid of any outliers that might be kind of skewing your data set. And so when we trim the mean, we're not looking to cut out just the outlier, we're cutting out a certain number of values from both the low end and both the high end, okay? And so in order to calculate a trimmed mean, we're going to follow these steps. So we're going to find the number of observations or things that we're talking about, which has always been n. We're going to make sure that they're ordered from smallest to largest. You can also do this largest to smallest. I just prefer smaller to larger. And then we're going to calculate how many values we need to cut from both ends. And then we're going to cut those values and then find the mean, median, and mode. So the first example that we're going to look at is to find the trimmed mean of 2, 35, 46, etc. So we're looking at these values over here. And so we're going to follow the steps that are listed on the right, or sorry, on the left-hand side here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is figure out how many values that I'm looking at. So I'm looking for the number of values that we're talking about in this question. In this case, n is equal to 10. So if you count up all of those numbers, 2, 35, 46, etc., there's 10 of them. So n is equal to 10. So we're going to order them, and they're actually already in order for us, which is kind of nice. So we have 2, 3, 35, 46, 47, 51, 51, 59, 60, 61, and 121. Okay, so that was the second step. So we found that. We found the order of them. Now we're going to figure out how many values to cut. So the P in this case is your percentage. So the number of values that we're going to cut is going to be n times your percentage, which in this case we're doing the 10% trimmed mean. So it's going to be n times 10%. So n is equal to 10, so we have 10 times 10%, which is just 1. So what that means is we're going to cut one number from each end of our data. So we're going to cut the lowest value, and we're going to cut the highest value. Okay, so that means to cut one number from each end, okay, and make sure that you do from each end. So a common mistake is just to cut out one number, but we need to cut one number from each side of our data. Okay, and so when we do that, what we're looking to find is the mean. So our mean is going to equal, so instead of rewriting everything, I'm just going to use what I have here. So our mean is going to equal all of these things added up together, divided by how many there are, right? And in this case, because we cut out two values, my n now is equal to 8. So I only have 8 values that we're dealing with. So when you add those all together, I believe you should get 410, and you're dividing by 8, which should work out to 51.25. Okay, and so those are the steps. So just reorder everything, figure out how many values you're going to cut by taking your percentage times n, If a question doesn't give you a percentage, you're just going to use 10%. Okay? Sometimes it'll be 10%, sometimes it will be more. And then you cut those values from both sides of your data and then divide by your new n. So don't forget to renumber or figure out how many values that you have to work with. Okay, in this example that we went through in class, so I'm not going to go through the whole example, but what I wanted to show you is that it's not always just going to be one number that you're cutting from each end. It depends on how many values you're talking about. So in this question, our n is equal to 20, and the percentage that we were asked to cut was to find the 20% trimmed mean. Okay, so we're trimming 20% of our data, which means if I just want to figure out how many pieces of data I would cut, that's going to use that equation that we just did, n times p. So n is 20, and we're timesing that by our p of 20%, which works out to 4 numbers. So this means I'm going to cut out 8 numbers in total. Okay, so we're going to cut 4 from the low end and 4 from the high end. So I would reorder all of these sprints. So we would reorder the number of seconds for each sprint from lowest to highest, and then cut out the top 4 highest sprints and the bottom 4 lowest sprints. And then everything would be done the same way as we've been doing. Okay, so just know that it's not always going to be one value from each side. It depends on how many things that you're talking about in your question. Okay, and then the last topic that we're going to look at in this section is the weighted mean. So weighted mean is calculated when certain values are worth more than others. So we talked about in class how usually for teachers, this is how we calculate student marks. So this is a really practical application, especially if any of you are thinking of going into education. Okay, so the steps that we talked about in class are over here. So in order to calculate a weighted mean, we're going to multiply each value by its weight. We're going to add up the products, add the weights, and then divide. So basically we're doing the same thing as finding the mean, just in a bit of a different way. So in this example, for the first part of the question, it's asking us to calculate the mean of the following 3 assignments. So this is, number 1. Okay, so for number 1, the mean is just how we've been doing it all this time. So we're going to say it's the sum of our values divided by n. So I would take my 65, my 95, and my 80, and then divide by 3. So when you do that, that works out to 240 over 3, which works out to 80. Okay, so that gives me an average of 80. This would be a percent. Okay, if we wanted to find the weighted mean, so now we're looking at part 2 of this question. So the first assignment and the last assignment are worth 40% of the final grade, and the middle assignment is only worth 20. So to calculate the weighted mean, the first assignment scored a mark of 65, and that assignment is worth 40% of the final grade. So what we would do is take that 65 and times it by 40. Now you're only going to use 1% button on your calculator for this, otherwise you're going to end up with a really small number. So we would go 65% times 40, and when we do that we get 26. Okay, so that's going to give us a mark out of 40. The second assignment, that's the one in the middle, is worth, so they scored 95 on that one. And this one was worth 20%. So I'm going to take 95% times 20 and end up with 19 on that one. And then the third assignment is worth 40%, and they scored 80 on that one. So it's going to be 80 times 40, and that works out to 32. Okay, so that's the first step, is to multiply each value by its weight. Then we're going to add up all of those products. So 26 plus 19 plus 32 gives us a 77. The next step is to add up all of the weights themselves. So these values here are the weights. So they add up to 100. And because we're trying to calculate a percentage, we don't actually have to do these last two steps for this question, because this answer already is our final mark. Because we've been using percents, we don't want to double percent it, otherwise we'll get a really small number. So the weighted mean for this particular person is 77. So that would be their final mark for this one. Okay, and I think we're going to look at one more example. And I'll just show you a bit of a different way of how you can lay out this question. So we have 100 people surveyed, and they exercised different amounts, and what we want to do is calculate the weighted mean. So this is a weighted mean question because while we don't have categories like assignment marks, we do have different number of people working out different number of days every week. So in order to do this question, we can set it up like a regular mean if that is easier for you to do. So we can say, in order to calculate this, I'm going to take the number of days per week and I'm going to multiply it by the number of people that worked out that much. And that's going to be what's on top. That's going to be my sum. So I'm going to go 0 times 6 people plus 1 times 5 people plus 2 times 7 people. So 2 hours a day for 7 people. 15 people worked out 3 hours a day, and so on. So 4 times 29. And I'm just going to continue underneath here. 5 times 16, 6 times 14, and 7 times 8. Okay, so that would be the sum on top of my fraction for my mean. What goes on the bottom is the total number of people. Okay, and in this question, n is equal to 100. So when you do this, each of these work out to 0 plus, that's a 5, plus 14, plus 45, plus 116, plus 80, 84, and 56. And we're going to divide by 100 people. So when you add all of those together, that works out to 400 over 100. And when you divide that through, we get an average of 4. So this 4 means that the mean is the number of days that this group of people exercise. So the average number of days per person in this group is 4 hours. So 4 hours per day for each person in this group. Okay, and that's just another way of calculating the weighted mean. So you can do it either like the previous assignment, the previous example, or like this one. Okay, and that wraps up weighted means, trimmed means, and outliers. If you have any questions, as always, you can ask me in class or send me a message on Edmodo. Next lesson will be on percentiles. Okay, have a great day and thanks for watching.